Are you recording as well?
Yep, I'll record it as well just to have it.
Sweet. Well, actually, let me go get water real quick. I'll be right back.
That's right.
I need to hydrate.
Are you comfortable? Nobody really answered this. How do you feel about doing this next week too? This same topic.
Oh, right.
Syria in there.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's why I kind of stopped because I don't even know what's going on with Syria. Honestly, I hadn't heard about that part, so I was going to bring that up in the midst of the conversation. But yeah, I mean, I'm good to keep talking about it because I think after today, I'll probably be able to get my thoughts more in a row. Because part of it, well, I don't want to get to it yet, right? So, okay.
I'm back in the seat again.
Back, baby. Okay, well, it's November 6th for us. 2023, and today we are talking about the conflict with Israel and Hamas/Palestine. Not even sure how to phrase it properly, so I apologize for that. But it's just the way I understand
it so
it's
Hamas.
Far.
It's just Hamas, but
Hamas. Okay.
Yeah.
So talking about that,
we'll get back from that. Sorry, people like, how dare you say it's that?
Right, I with how heated I guess the conversation is, right? It's like even saying something like that, there's going to be like a billion people are just like, how dare you even equate them as far as being the same thing. Yeah, so we're talking about that and just the can of worms and really just kind of seeing where we're all at on this. We'll just kind of see what we've been hearing, what we've been thinking. And maybe we can kind of come to some kind of conclusion together, or at least just inform ourselves through the conversation. Hopefully anyone else listening as well, for entertainment value at the very least. So, does anyone in particular want to start, or I can just say something real fast and pass it to one of you guys?
I can say some stuff.
All right, David.
Like I was saying with Brian before you got on the call, the history of all this is like, I've always kind of looked at this situation as like kids fighting in a sandbox, it's just like, guys, it just at the macro rather, it's sort of like it just shows how immature people are. That being said, it is insane to me how many people are supporting Hamas and all this. I mean, I think it's crazy. If any other group was doing this here, they'd be considered a terrorist group, a domestic terrorist group. I think that Israel has the closest thing to our Western values, and I think that there's a reason that we're allied with them. What scares me, and we can get into this later, what scares me, though, is our attachment to that and what happens when we have to intervene in some of this stuff. And I think that can have a ripple effect that can cause some real problems beyond just, some war in the Middle East that we're part of. I think that this could go in a direction that gets very bad for people. But I think in general, it's like, I think from what I understand, Israel gave up the Gaza Strip in 2005, right? So they
gave it up, but they didn't really abide by the rules. They kept encroaching and taking land, and they said, "Fuck it, we're just going to keep doing stuff and taking what we said we're going to give to you." And they've just slowly been taking their stuff, their properties.
The Jews have, in that whole area, a piece of land that's like the size of New Jersey, and they're just surrounded by enemies. And I mean, I think it's just, they, in my mind, are like the only bit of light in that area. I mean, I know that like Netanyahu catches a lot of shit. I know he's very conservative, but at any given time, Tel Aviv has protests that you would see here, pro gay rights protests, all that stuff. The people, Hamas is a group that wants to kill gay people. When you see people rioting or protesting rather in America and they're saying queers for Palestine, that's an insane thing to me to see. It's like those people want to kill you. And I feel to a certain extent that it's a knee-jerk reaction against anything that's Western. There's this self-hatred that we have here. And anything that, to me, it's just not a very self-aware position to take. But I'll toss it to whoever now.
I don't know. It's very complicated because it goes back it goes back thousands of years, but more recent stuff that we can tie into this, it starts back around World War I, and the British and the French, asking I think it was the Palestinians at the time to help destroy the Ottoman Empire. So they went and helped destroy the Ottoman Empire, and with promises that they were going to get this land and get these leaders and everything. And then when the war was said and done, the English and the French were like, psych. And so then they would have these accords and these meetings where, okay, well, we're going to give you this land, that not even taken in like the Palestinians, like thoughts, or they were part of the conversation. They just kind of were told where to go, and they're like, well, you're kicking me out of my land, and they don't like that. So I know people are going like, well, Jerusalem has a right to defend itself. Well, so does the people who have been living there. They've slowly been losing their stuff. I mean, both have done a lot of awful things. There is no innocent side in this. They've done extremely awful things. I think there were about 3,000 children that are already dead from in Palestine because of the bombings and everything from Israel. So there's just so much going on. I was watching this video about all the history and all the things about things didn't, the things didn't go for the Palestinians, so they would attack, and then they would come back and attack with something. There's always back and forth. So it's really hard to point blame to anyone. So it makes it even more convoluted and hard to critique and find an answer. One of the things, though, when you're saying about Netanyahu is that it came to mind is they actually support Hamas. They paid Hamas to do stuff. Like, they've funded Hamas, just like USA has funded Al Qaeda and everything in the past. There's money going into them from Netanyahu to help and stuff. So it's kind of messed up. I think one of the sayings was like, what's the best recruitment for Hamas, or who's the best recruitment for Hamas? It's Israel, because the more you kill innocents, the more they're going to want to come back and do that back to you. So it's we learned this in Afghanistan when we kept bombing people, and you can't kill the terrorism when you're killing innocent people, because you're going to kill a family member or something. They're going to want to exact revenge. So that makes it a very challenging situation.
I can respond to that, but Eric, do you want to say something?
I guess just my kind of opening thoughts is that, so it seems like, some of the arguments is that, obviously Hamas in this moment in time, because I think we could argue that it's obviously been going on for a long time, but at this moment, Hamas is the one that's made the first move, and so Israel is just retaliating to that offense.
But see, that I don't think that's a fair statement, because something just didn't happen. They've been being attacked, and their culture is being purged for years and years and years. So this wasn't just out of nowhere that this happened. It was like there is force from Israel on them that put them in this mindset that this needed to happen, and their culture and everything. So it wasn't just out of nowhere. There was this built-up pressure that putting them between like a rock and a hard place. Mm-hmm. So you can't just say they just did this. I don't think that's a fair statement, because it happened recently, but there's been stuff years and years in the past that led them to this situation. So,
well, I'm leaning more towards that what you said. I'm just trying to say what the arguments are, because that definitely seems to be a prevalent argument that you're hearing, is people saying that Israel has a right to defend itself against the attacks. That's more so what I'm trying to say, set the stage for the arguments anyways. But I'm leaning more towards the sense of just this has been an ongoing thing. I don't think Israel has been, pitch perfect in all of this situation. Ultimately didn't have justified recourse for something like that. Obviously, war, murder, and all that stuff is not something any of us want to see. But that's certainly an argument that's happening. And the other argument, which I was going to say, was they had Palestine and then Hamas kind of rising from Palestine, from my understandanding. Like they're Palestinian.
Hamas isn't Palestine. It's a group within Palestine, because Palestine has
KKK.
Yeah, because
it's like an extreme Islamic group.
There are a lot of people don't know this, but they're like Christian Palestinians, they're Jewish Palestinians, they're Islamic Palestinians. There's a variety of people that different religions that live in Palestine, but people think it's just purely Hamas, and that it's unfortunate. That's how the media portrays it, and people will see it as that way. Like they'll equivalent Hamas is Palestine, and that's a hard thing for people to
everybody
separate.
Seems to be doing that. It's kind of frustrating.
Yeah, it is. It's really bad.
That's what some of the arguments have been from like Breaking Points. I've been watching that, and like even like Jimmy Dore a little bit too. They've been talking about or showing clips of some of these like Israeli prime ministers and other politicians in Israel talking about just like there is no innocent Palestinian or something like that. There is no innocent Gazian, or however they're phrasing it. They've been illustrating obviously the like terrifying aspect of that type of verbiage, which I would agree as well, is to say that there is no innocent. I don't know enough to say it per se, but I mean I would say that 100% or 0% is not right, obviously. So, but I think I watched one thing with Ben Shapiro, or he went to Oxford or something. I just watched a clip. But one woman was talking about the proportion of like death that's been happening from like Israel versus like Hamas and everything. And she's saying that Israel's been doing more damage and everything. And then Shapiro made an interesting, which I didn't quite agree with. I just kind of want to bring it up more so we could talk about it, because I don't know how I felt about it necessarily, if it was a good or a bad argument. But he said, well, I want there to be more casualties on the Hamas side from the opposed to Israel. So like if Britain was killing more Germans, does that mean that Britain was the one that was wrong because they were killing more Germans? Like we agree that the Nazis were the ones that were wrong in the past, and it was a good thing that we were killing more of them than they were killing of us.
Yeah, I guess that comes down to if you're okay with eye for an eye as a justification of something, instead of trying to come up with a solution, because without the extermination, you're essentially, it's like a genocide of people. Unless you can come up with a peaceful resolution, you're just going to try to eliminate all of them, because it's either you come to a peaceful resolution or the other side's completely wiped out.
That's why it seems.
Ben Shapiro.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say Ben Shapiro also is like he is. I think everybody knows this. He's extremely Jewish. He's got family there.
Yes.
So I think looking at it from his perspective, I've actually watched a few of his things on this. I like Ben Shapiro a lot. I don't agree with him a lot, but I really do. I have a lot of respect for him. And I don't, a lot of this stuff, I don't, it's very convoluted. I don't know. He believes that, for instance, when he looks at the history of Israel, he looks at it like the Jews left from Egypt, and Moses led them, and then for 40 years they were, he believes all that. As far as I know, there's not really any evidence for that. But that's where he's coming from. That's his family over there. Right. So you can kind of understand it. And it is worth saying that, Israel didn't exist until 1948. They have this very small sliver of land, and they're surrounded by enemies. And at the end of the day, I finished a book on World War II recently, and it was like, it was very brutal. It talked about like the Bataan Death March, and it talked about the American POWs in Unit 731 in Japan. Mm-hmm. Anytime there's a war, it's just horrific. It just is. The World War II, for instance, you can talk about like the things that America did versus the things that the Japanese did. Everybody knows about Germany, but
and what the Russians did, and the war brings out the fucking worst people.
We're just not. Sad. We're just at a very. I say this a lot. We're just at a very weird stage in human evolution, where where we're like kids. This whole situation is like kids in the sandbox. But the point I'm trying to make is that if Hamas, they're not good people. You know, I mean, I know that the Israeli government is not perfect, and to be honest, I'm fairly ignorant on a lot. I always heard that Netanyahu was very conservative. I didn't know much about him until recently, like in the last year or so. But their values are way more in line with what we consider progressive, liberal, capitalist values that have brought the world to the place that it is today. The Enlightenment, all that stuff happened because of values that those people preach. You don't want Hamas in charge of anything that interacts with anything civilized. I mean, those people don't give a shit about you. They don't give a shit about me. You know, if you have any sort of, women are second-class citizens, all that stuff, you know? And I think this idea that one side or the other, that they're just balanced, I just don't see that. I think that, honestly, I get why, Israel is our ally. And I mean, Hamas is not, Brian's point that it's not a government. They're just a radical group inside. I think I heard somebody say it would be like if the KKK was like 55% of Congress or something. It would be similar to that. So broadly speaking, that's how I feel about it. I think to me, that's just obvious.
Yeah. Well, that's why I was kind of conflicted with the Shapiro debate comment. Cause I felt like, it wasn't quite like, commenting on what she was commenting on. I felt like what the girl was saying was just the fact that we shouldn't just be killing indiscriminately because it's a war and they've been attacked and that's just how it goes ultimately. And so I kind of felt like he flipped it in a weird way, because then whenever he said so what's the difference? And she said, well, the difference is that, she says, Britain wasn't dropping bombs on innocent people, and the whole crowd is just like, you're fucking wrong about that. So I feel like it turned the whole conversation where it's like, well, the conversation should be partially, maybe even a big chunk about just who is getting killed. I saw one thing that Jimmy Dore had shown saying that it was, I think, Wolf Blitzer on CNN or whatever he's on, talking to one of the, someone in the military in Israel. And he was asking about how they had bombed a refugee camp and killed 400 civilians. And he was asking what that was about, and they said that there was some leader of Hamas that was in the refugee camp. And then Wolf Blitzer was just like, well, isn't that couldn't there have been a different way to get the one guy opposed to killing 400 people? And then at the end, he even asked too, did you kill the leader? And the Israeli military guy said, we can't confirm whether or not we killed him. And so it's stuff like that where how could you not argue about that's kind of fucked up? So
yeah, right.
It is, regardless of how much we need Israel potentially. I don't know how much we do need Israel, and not to say that we don't or that we do. I just don't know too much about that.
Their intelligence abilities are better than ours. They're a very important country,
right? But yeah, as far as what their importance is to us, I'm not too clear on. As far as are they a good place to have in the Middle East? Because then we have kind of eyes and ears on the ground that aren't our eyes and ears. I don't quite know what the relationship is. You know what I mean? I don't know if you guys do.
Well, they would argue that that's their land. And this is part of the issue, is that they would argue that this is their land. And, in my thing, I think it sounds like we would all agree on this, that it's sort of silly at this point to have that argument. Because who knows? The history goes back so far that you can't make those. You can't say that for sure. Nobody fucking knows. I mean, you're going back into mythological history, and But my just to say this, so the Mossad, excuse me, I'm fighting a cold. The Israeli Secret Service is, they're part of this is due to World War II supposedly, but they're in a do not fuck with us sort of mindset, and their ability. This was actually one of the things that people are criticizing the government about, is that how the hell did you not know that this was coming? Because the Mossad should know about all this.
Right, and that's where it goes back to the Netanyahu funding Hamas. Is this very conspiracy? Are they funding it to make them so they can get this way, or it's a very fucked up situation?
I didn't know that. I'm looking that up. I've got a thing. I'm going to read some about that before next week, because I was not aware of that.
Another thing is just going back through the history and everything, all the back and forth, and I feel like a lot of this problem is from Britain and their imperialism and wanting all what's best for them, and doing all these trades and backdoor deals and doing this and this. And I feel like they screw up a lot of stuff. I mean, look what they did with shit fell apart in China and in India, and it's still shit's working in the Middle East. So they just anywhere they go imperialize and do a two government system, it just ruins everything.
Yeah, I would say two things that, I mean, from what I've heard is that as far as, like, this land is our land, I mean, from what I've heard is, like, as far back as we know, it was always a mix of people. So it is just, like, choosing which part of history you're set. It's like you're choosing, like, when does life begin, to a certain extent. Which is, like, no, it's an impossible situation. But this whole thing kind of reminds me a little bit of, like, the Ukraine-Russia thing, too, because it's very much just, like, Ukraine was, like, all on the right, of course, because Russia is the aggressor, and it's the same thing with, like, Israel is only defending itself against the aggressors of Hamas and all that. So I think it's very simplistic, and, like, there is a part of me that completely agrees with that, 100%. Like, if someone, like, bombs my house, I'm gonna fucking go after you, is what's gonna happen. But then that's the complicated part now, is just, like... Texas. But the complicated part, right, is just like, well, now what's the method, and, like, at what point am I, becoming the evil I'm fighting against or whatever, right? Like all those movies and stories we hear about of just, like, the good hero that does whatever it takes, fucking Harvey Dent in The Dark Knight, right?
Well, that's the problem. Like, good and evil is all subjective. It's from depending on whose standpoint it is. Yeah, like what you're doing is good, or but you're going to kill a bunch of people, so they're going to think you're evil. So it's really
the radicalizing
really
thing that you brought up, as far as, like, this argument too of, like, the more the fighting happens, like, you're giving more cause to more people to hate you. So I think that's a good argument. So,
I think that, I mean, I agree. It's part of what you're saying, that good and evil is subjective, but at the same time, I think that we get in a lot of trouble by saying things like that, because there are things where I said this in the recording that you just put up, the first one, where I was saying that one of the scariest things to me is when we lose touch with objective reality, because I think that we have to have an understanding of what is objective and what's not, so that we can have definitions for things. I think that our society is going through a problem with this right now. But I think that, like, you're going to have different religions or views or whatever all throughout the world. Like, some people think that suicide is okay. Some places they think it's not. But I think that, we have gotten to a place in society that we are very lucky to be living through. And at the end of the day, I mean, like, the values that they're not perfect, I'm not saying that. I mean, when Obama was president, 90% of the drone fatalities were, just
civilians,
citizens. So civilians, thank you. So I'm not saying anybody's perfect, or far from it, but I think that the idea that there is just a better way to live versus just a more, just a more, like, just an archaic sort of violent, women are second class citizens, and if you're gay, we're going to hang you from a bridge type of thing. I hope that made sense.
It does. Well, what's scary about that is that how there's a strong viewpoint of that coming back in America. You can see that with a lot of the extremes on the right side. Women should have their place, and it's not to be, as an individual, it's supposed to be as, the secondary person, like you were saying. So that's reverting back to that. There's definitely a good chunk, not a good, there's definitely a chunk of people in America that want that to go back to that. So, with them getting these individualism and everything, that's very recent in American history. Like, it wasn't until the 1920s, almost 100 years ago, that, women had the right to vote. So, and even longer for them to even get, like, a credit card. I don't think they could get a credit card.
1976, I think.
Yeah, it's so.
If we could just go back to that, that'd be awesome to save some money.
But I think we can still make the same point with that. I don't know how large of a chunk of America that is. I mean, I think that we can have that conversation at some point if you want. I'm down to have that. But we all agree for the most part that that's not good, and we don't want to go back to that. Oh yeah,
definitely.
So, I mean, that's sort of what I'm saying with having liberal progressive values. I think that I think that is a lot more fragile than people realize. And I think holding on to that and realizing that this is good, we don't want to lose that shit. But I mean, you're right. Yeah, I think I just read this. It was like 1976 women were allowed to get a credit card. I mean, that is very recent. Those things are very fragile. And I think protecting those values is very important. And I think that of the two groups there, Israel definitely represents the values that we share.
Right, I agree with you that objective truth is important, that we need to fight for that so that way we can all be on the same page with it. But I would agree that there is a moral relativism across the globe. Like if you speak to somebody in Russia, in fucking Israel, and the U.S., like you're going to have different viewpoints about what is right and what is wrong. India, Gaza Strip. I mean,
but which one do you want to? I mean, everybody's going to have a different view of it. But
right.
You can't just say everything's subjective, so you do whatever you want.
No. That's not what I'm saying. Though I'm not saying that gives you a pass to do whatever you want. What I'm saying the subjectivity comes to is what everyone's belief is the objective truth. That's what the subjectivity is. Is like your culture and your ethnic background, everything is kind of representative of like what's worked in your little club. And that's what you think reality is, because that's, I mean, what's a better reflection of reality versus what's actually worked in implementation.
And that exists I mean, there's many different cultures in the U.S. where there's a little different.
So I saw a video. It was pretty interesting. It kind of hits base on the Western view of things. Is that the BBC was doing like talking points or whatever, and they travel once in a while, and they were in Ireland. And they're having this speech about this thing, and this woman came up and was, talking about how Britain in the past hasn't been so good and did all this stuff, and what the IRA did and all these bombings. So it was really interesting to see, how there's something very similar to that. And so this woman was like, you can't she was not giving supporting Hamas, but she was definitely throwing stuff against Israel, because you can't say that they're in the right, because look at all this they did, and look what England did to Ireland and all this stuff. But from the English side, they're in the right. So,
a side note, the IRA is a very interesting organization to read about. Continue.
Maybe one day I'll read that. I mean, that's why I would go and to kind of a little bit. String this a little bit longer. What your point is, David, in the sense of the objective truth and what do we want to win out in the grand scheme of things. In my view of truth and objective truth is it's that representation of reality. What is actually working? It's just okay, I know if I pour water downhill, it goes downhill. So I'm not going to plan for water to go uphill, but that's just going to meet me in failure ultimately. I do have the belief that Western civilization has the best depiction of reality, because I feel like it's worked the best for the most people over time. I think it's put us in a better position as a globe to increase our wealth, bring us out of poverty and stuff like that. So I think that is the right direction for sure. I just don't think that everyone thinks that ultimately.
I agree. I agree with you. I mean that squashes ultra conservative values to a certain extent, if you don't want women to have rights, or you don't want gay people to be able to, and it is worth mentioning that there was a time in this country where you couldn't walk outside without a man, and you couldn't
it's true.
But we're headed in a different direction. But no, I mean, I see what you're saying. I don't think anybody would argue with that. There is a different
Right, because I mean, if that's the case, then certainly we'd like to, what it's the ideal is that we do want democracy, right, to blossom throughout the world, and the idea of this utopia, and that the whole world will be a democratic society, and that we'll just but somehow have some socialism wrapped in there, so we can get stuff paid for, and social programs make it to where our life is more utopian and everything. So I get that perspective. I am sympathetic to the idea of just there is war crimes, there is innocent people, and the most you can mitigate that, I think, the better. Which is, I mean, it's an easy thing for me to say, right? I mean, when you're in war, it's a different thing, of course, and everything. But I'm sympathetic to that argument, I guess.
It's really frustrating to have these conversations at all, even in your own mind, because it is, there's never been the most extreme one is going back to World War II, like dropping the bombs. You can have that conversation with fucking anybody, and it gets into like, well, if they didn't do it, this would have happened.
Right.
If they forgot to do it, this would, and it's
you can't live with what ifs or ifs. Yeah.
And there is a quote from a movie called A Beautiful Mind. I always remember this quote, and it was about the dropping of the bomb, but I think it relates to everything. He's saying that conviction is a luxury for those on the sidelines,
right?
And being thankful that you don't have to make those decisions, But yeah, I mean, it's just we're at the end of the day, like I think that humans are just in a really fucked up place in our evolution, and it's kind of like when a teenager is really weird looking and they're like, just going through puberty. I feel like humans are at that spot right now. And we're just, and again, when I see or hear about the stuff in the Middle East, to me, it's like, okay, this is kids playing in a sandbox.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
I just gave zero solution at all. I gave no solutions to the problem.
That's what you're best at, David.
There's no easy solution to this. There's no one is gonna like everything about it. There's gonna have to be a lot of compromise or a complete eradication. So and to come with that compromise, that's going to take a lot of effort. Then they've been trying it for years and years and years. So it's like, what else? Where else can they try? What else can they do? So it's just there's.
I think it's interesting because I feel like I don't want to presume too much, but I almost feel like we've kind of flip-flopped our perspectives versus on that World War II conversation about dropping the bombs. Because I kind of felt like, I'll speak for myself, but I would say I thought maybe Bryant was similar to my thinking, that it was more or less like it almost had to happen because it was just a way of ending it, basically. Like the bombs had to be dropped, and I felt like, David, you were more arguing about like that was just way too far, we shouldn't have dropped the bombs. And I feel like now we've kind of reversed roles where like maybe, David, you're a little bit more like, well, they need to fight back the terror. And then, like, I feel like Bryant and I are now a little bit more just like, well, there's casualties and everything. I don't know why we're doing that. Maybe I'm just imagining this, but I think that's interesting. I'd like to reconcile that. I don't know if we can right now, but I just wanted to bring that up. I thought it was interesting.
Well, I told you I read a book on World War II, and it was real interesting to read it while learning about all this stuff that's going on. And it, like, just the moving pieces there. Like, there's an argument that every POW was going to be killed in whatever way they could be, whether it's drowning, poisoning, skinned alive, hanging, if we didn't drop the bomb. Like the Japanese were ordered to kill every American POW. That's never been proven.
Right.
Yeah.
But then some people say that that America just wanted to see if we could do it. That kind of sounds a little insane to me. I
agree. I do too.
Yeah.
There's one of the things I like, the Japanese were like kamikaze. That was their thing. They knew they weren't doing well, so they're just taking all their stuff and just like, well, we're just gonna kamikaze everything with no care. Like, so there's that aspect of it. Like, how do you fight against something who's just gonna like make
they don't care?
Yeah. So
well, and they felt that one of the reasons they were so brutal to POWs, American POWs, is because, and they said this, they felt like it was shameful to surrender. And they would, I mean, talking about cultural differences, if they had to surrender, they'd commit suicide. I forget the name of it. I can't pronounce it anyway. But that's how... and I'm kind of sympathetic to that.
Seppuku, something like that, yeah.
There's a part of me that thinks that that's kind of honorable. I would never do it, but there's a part of me that respects that viewpoint. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, there is, but at the same time, like, what if you have, like, family at home? Like, you don't want to leave them fatherless.
Yeah, that's true.
So, like, it's surrendering, like, it's not... But with those people, a lot of those things it's what's best for the country, the idea of their country instead of what's best for their immediate family. So I feel like that comes through sometimes. And the ones that would surrender is like, I care more about what's right for my family, and I want the chance to come back home to my wife and my kids.
Yeah.
And my loved ones. So
yeah, no, that's another example of something being objective. Like, Americans are way more individualistic, so they're looking at it like this is, I got to get back to my wife and my kids, versus, okay, I'm letting my whole country down, sort of a thing, But I don't know. I think that all this stuff is interesting, and what you define as good and what I define as good might be a little different. But I try to look at, especially this specific topic, generally, which group here that we're talking about really gives a shit about pushing the world forward. You know, and that's sort of, I came into this conversation saying I thought of so many different ways to talk about this, and
right.
none of them seemed like they were going to work. So that's my argument there.
That's why I tried, like I said, tried to write something down, but I just felt like there were so many angles that the only way to just do it was just to talk through it, and eventually all the angles will come out over time and everything. Another thing I heard on Breaking Point is that they were arguing about Israel is performing a ethnic cleansing, and one of the things they pointed to was that they were trying to push all of the civilians from Gaza into Egypt. Saying that, hey, just take them so that way we can keep fighting in Gaza but not, hurt as many civilians and stuff like that. But then they were making some kind of argument about that they were doing that in the sense of because the idea is that they would never take them back. So it was kind of like a way to push them away. But I feel like that's an impossible thing because it's on one hand, they're doing what you want is to get people out of there so they can keep the fighting without killing people unnecessarily, but then when you're moving people, you're saying, oh, you're doing that on purpose, that way they can never come back, and now Israel owns Gaza again. I'm like, that, it seems to me an impossible situation, I guess, that they're arguing. But I don't know what you guys think about that. But
I've heard the thing. I need to look into that specific one. The big story that I heard that I'm surprised we didn't bring up. I thought we were going to get into an argument about this. But it was there was a story that I think the New York Post reported on that Israel bombed a hospital, and then that turned out not to be true.
Right.
Y'all know that story.
I heard about that. Yeah.
So I didn't hear about this ethnic cleansing thing. I'll have to look that up.
There, you guys are like this. I saw parts of it, but it's like a 2-hour interview. It's Piers Morgan versus Bassem Youssef.
Yeah.
It's very, very interesting. And
I like Piers Morgan, man. I'm gonna look that up.
Bassem Youssef, he's great. So he used to be a doctor, and then he left that to become a comedian. But he brings up some really good points. He's very fucking smart. So
is it on YouTube?
Yeah, it's Piers Morgan versus Bassem Youssef round 2.
This wasn't the.
There's a round 1 as well, but the round 2 is
Yeah, I've seen this popping up everywhere. I'll watch it later.
Yeah, it's got some interesting talking points to give you perspective.
Was this the one where it was Hamas, one of the founders of Hamas, one of the kids or something? Or was that a different guy?
So really good-looking Middle Eastern man.
I can't remember. That sounds familiar, but he brings something up about talking about how essentially some kid got he went home, or I don't know, I can't remember it all. I watched a lot of stuff recently. Yeah. But that does sound familiar about how a kid with that
Piers Morgan had a guy on basically from I watched one clip. I didn't watch the whole interview, but he had some guy on that was one of the founders of Hamas's kids that had left and converted to Christianity and lives in Israel or something like that. And it was kind of just him talking to him about his perspective of just you know both sides pretty well at this point. So that, I don't know if it was the same guy or not, but
that I don't know. That doesn't actually sound familiar, that part.
Yeah, this guy that Brian's talking about, the guy looks like he could be a movie star or something, real good looking guy. But I've seen this advertised everywhere. I just haven't watched it.
Yeah, definitely check it out. It's got some good information, good talking points, and just good knowledge to be had.
I'll say this, man. Piers Morgan, I frequently disagree with the guy, but he has fucking balls, man. Yeah. He'll just say whatever. I really respect that about people, even if I disagree with them. I'm like, man, I don't know.
Well, when you get paid that much, it's easy to just say what you want.
Yeah. That's why I like Lex a lot, too, is because, Lex will have people on his podcast, and they'll mention, my mom died of, this horrific alligator boating accident when I was, 2, and for some reason I remember it, even though you're not supposed to remember things when you're 2. And Lex will just be tell me about that. And then they'll get off track and be hey, by the way, let's get back to how your mom died. And it's just it's so kind of jarring. I don't know if it's a cultural thing since he's from Ukraine. But
he had Netanyahu on.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
So did Peterson as well. But it's just kind of interesting. But I feel like he does ask questions that most people would kind of like maybe find taboo or wouldn't want to push the button on a little bit. But I feel like Lex kind of leans into those moments, and I think they make for better conversations because they're the more it's the taboo things, but they're the more the real things, if you will. So, anyways,
conflict and stuff like that is good for ratings when you get the extremes and get into the edge of I don't know how to say that, but bringing up those like strong topics like that, it's very argumentative and stuff, so you can get good content.
Well, that's why I think it's interesting too with this is because I've watched a lot of people over the years. Like Russell Brand is someone I was interested in, but I gotta tell you, I haven't really watched him for a long time. I don't really know why that is. And like Jimmy Dore, I've watched here and there in certain times. Rogan, I've watched here and there at certain times. Breaking Point's been kind of like more of a main thing for me now, but I could see that maybe fading. And it's just like, it's interesting because like, it's like you have like this, maybe you're the anti-COVID lockdown bandwagon. And like you have your group and like it was 3 years of like, fuck the government, why are they locking us down? But now it's like a new conflict and we all have these different ideas about the new conflict. So I almost kind of feel like some of these like alliances are splitting, but it seems the most natural thing in the world that not everyone's going to agree about everything, right? But it feels almost kind of weird. And to kind of bring it back a little bit to like the World War II atomic bombs versus this, it's just like why is that different in my mind? I don't know. Like why I think the bombs made sense and why I think the argument about not bombing refugees.
Because it's been conditioned in your brain. You grew up like learning all about that through American history in class. So
could be.
It's just.
Could be.
Yeah, I feel like there's a little bit of conditioning that.
Yeah. It's history too. I mean, it's history, so you just kind of maybe look at it more like it's written in stone, and so it's less of a thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
that could be.
As far as the alliances thing with alternative media, a lot of people have brought that up. I think it's you and I have talked about this a little bit, just one-on-one. I think a lot of that's like Dave Rubin, for instance. I agree with almost everything he says, but he's been captured by his audience, and so he almost like does. I don't even think he spouts his own opinions anymore.
Right.
And I think that some of those guys have gotten caught into that. Steven Crowder is an extreme example of that. But I do have a question here shortly. But how